Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Roger Wade. Roger Wade is a creative entrepreneur who originally started Box Fresh, a streetwear brand back in the 90s, and then went on to create BOXPARK in 2010. BOXPARK is a food and independent retail outlet that have sites in Shoreditch, Croydon, Wembley, with a new Box Hall site which opened in Bristol. I was actually there the other day. I absolutely love BOXPARK, Roger. It's such a vibrant, kind of pulsating heartbeat of East London. The food's insane, the vibe's insane. I remember discovering Black Bear Burger there, like the brisket burger. It genuinely changed my life. So I am so excited for you coming on today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Dan. I think you're being too generous.
So in doing research for this conversation, I've kind of picked up on this kind of superpower you have, which is this like creative kind of gumption and emotional prudence to spot trends before everyone else. So if we go back to the 90s with, when you were in New York with the streetwear stuff, bringing that into the UK, kind of with BOXPARK, spotting Shoreditch as the next kind of thing back in 2010, the ability to kind of, put food in and indie retailers into shipping containers, that in of itself was very prudent. And I was listening to a podcast you did with Holly Tucker, which was absolutely brilliant. And you said that founders don't use emotional intelligence enough these days. I would love to kind of dive in and start with your childhood. Like, where do you think this ability to spot trends came from? And did your childhood have a role to play in that?
Wow, straight in the deep end. Okay, I mean, yeah, let's. Firstly, it's kind of you to say superpowers. I wouldn't quite say superpower. I wouldn't even say power. I would just say that I'm in tune with my emotional intelligence, which is, for those viewers out there, if they're wondering what I mean by that, it means I trust my own instinct. I don't need to see something done for me to realize that could be, a great idea. And as Steve Jobs said, I can trace that back through sort of connecting up the dots of my life. And you're dead right. It does come from childhood or whatever. It comes from, not so much with me, childhood, although I'd say a bit childhood, but definitely in my early entrepreneurial career, and I'll explain why. This might be a long answer, but
go for it.
I think a lot of people, when they set up businesses, I think you've got to understand why you set up a business. And the reality with me was I set up a business because I got the sack in my first 3 jobs in advertising. I was like, I really came to the conclusion after university, the age of about 22, that I was unemployable. And if I didn't employ myself, no one was going to employ me. So my last job in advertising was I was working in New York as a copywriter, and I wasn't teamed up with anyone. And I was always a bit cheeky, so I was on the phone. They gave me a whole office with my phone, so I was just calling my mates back in England. This is sort of pre-internet days. And they'd be saying, "Oh, get some of this American sportswear," and I'd send this American sportswear back. And then, lo and behold, when I did get the sack, I went back to the UK, and I didn't know what to do. But I had a box of all this American sportswear that I'd bought from Korean wholesalers in Midtown Manhattan. And I just started selling it down a market. And then suddenly, there was a lot of demand for it. It was in the late 80s, I think, about 88, 89 or something like that. And it literally sort of started to take off. And then the next minute I met some designers, and Olaf Parker and Sue Denny, and together with my partner at that time, Ben Joseph, we started one of the first ever British streetwear brands, Box Fresh, okay? And literally at a time when streetwear wasn't big. And we built up that brand to, quite a sizable business over a sort of 15 to 18 year period, and eventually sold out to Pentland, who owned JD Sports and used to own Reebok. But what I learned from that experience was a couple of different things. When I first set up the brand, and for those people who are thinking of setting up businesses and being entrepreneurs, I think you've got to realize why you're doing it. You've got to ask your why. And I'll be frank with you, in my first business, I think I was doing it for ego. You know, it was so, I suddenly was good at something. You know, I wasn't getting the sack. You know, all right, I was quite decent at cricket, but if I say so myself,
yeah.
I'm suddenly good at something. You know, oh, Roger owns this streetwear brand, they're doing well, and it was good for my ego. And I think this, you get a lot of people that set up businesses because of their ego. So when you talk about childhood, certainly the drive to succeed came from the fact that, you know, I didn't end up doing the degree I wanted to do. I was gonna maybe become a doctor. I ended up doing a degree in environmental science, never really went to any classes, ran clubs, and thought I wanted to go into advertising. And actually I didn't have the social skills, not social skills, but the patience to work at a desk the whole day. So, you know, I started my first business really to define myself. Now, what I learned, so that's the childhood bit, what I learned along the way was when I was running this fashion business, and certainly as it went on in time, we would produce nearly 1,000 products a year. There wasn't a spreadsheet that was going to tell us how to design a jacket like this. You had to do it through feel. I had a team of designers, and we'd travel the world, and we might buy some samples, but you know, at that time in streetwear, it was an unwritten rule, you never copied anyone, you know, so we were trying to outbeat each other. And as a result, I got used to trusting my taste, because I couldn't start like looking at data or anything like that to make this product. In order to make it, if I did design this shirt, I would have to do it from feel. So actually that's something I carried forward. That's something that came with confidence. As you get to a stage where you start seeing your brand grow and grow and grow, and you start realizing that people like your taste, that you get self-confidence. And I brought that self-confidence with me in BOXPARK, in terms of I wanted to create something new. You know, I didn't need to look at what everyone else had done, because that's what I was used to doing with Box Fresh. So in the case of BOXPARK, I actually had just a very simple idea for business, which was back in, you know, the early sort of 2000s. They were already talking about the death of the high street and stuff like that. But I always believed that people wanted to feel special. So I wanted to create a high street for independence. And then at the same time, I already built a store out of a container for Box Fresh, you know, a box store. And a friend of mine happened to run a retail development. So all I really did was connect up the dots of my life, which was a home for independence, built out of containers. And it was a retail development because my mate ran a retail development, and he wasn't that smart. And if he could do it, I could do it. So it's weird. I look back now, and it was this connecting up the dots of my life. It was some of the things about my early childhood that got me to where I was at the end. But in the end, one of the things that's really put me in good stead is I've got a self-belief in my taste. And I've built that up over 20 or 30 years. I'm not saying I've got the best taste in the world, but I believe in my taste. So I have when I'm thinking I can create a whole pop-up mall from containers, and at the time, no one had ever built a pop-up mall from containers. I actually had to read a book about how to build from containers. I just believed I could do it. I was so naive. I actually, in retrospect, go, how the hell did I do that? You know, but that naivety sometimes helps. So I think the lessons that I'm trying to point out there are know your reason why for setting up in business. Really start to trust your emotional intelligence. Don't be frightened to create something new, okay? And just because it hasn't been done before, it doesn't mean it can't be done again. And don't look at your mistakes as a bad thing. All my greatest, our best innovation came from mistakes. It really did. It was through us resolving those mistakes that we led to innovation, because that's the nature of innovation. That's how things get created, you know. When Edison wants to create a light bulb, you know, it's not, he didn't have a light bulb moment. It sort of came about that way. You know, it came from 1,000 different experiments he created to try and create light or whatever, you know. You just stumble across the idea. And I think in many ways I stumbled across the idea. So yeah, that's in a long-winded way, that is my own journey, and that's what connects it together. But I'm a great believer in trusting your emotional intelligence. And I do believe there's too many people sort of coming out of business school or whatever, and they're just thinking, oh, I've been at business school, I'm going to be great at business. You're not going to be good at some aspects, but you know, in the end, if you don't have great product, you don't have great content, you're not going to exist, and you've got to be obsessive about that content. So in my companies, I really promoted those people in my worlds, those people that maybe had some vision when it came to making product, when it came to marketing. Because the business bit we can always create for them, but it's hard to find those guys.
No, it's so true. And I think, I mean, I literally having this conversation the other day about kind of data decision making is burned into the zeitgeist. And everyone's just like, everything has to be done data. And I think we're losing this ability, and we'll unpack it in a sec, I think, in terms of what, as you said there, in terms of like trusting your gut. And I think the more data that's kind of we're getting pummeled with more and more data, it's like losing our ability to trust those gut instincts. And it's really, really worrying. But there was just so much in that.
Explore that. Sorry, I've got to explore that with you, you know, because, you know, don't get me wrong, like Box Fresh, we used to use data. So the data that we would use would be the best sellers. And what you would say is that, right, we've got to have versions of our best sellers. But that might have been only 80% of our sales might have came from 20% of our range. So we might regurgitate 20% of our range. But then we would be creating 80% new product to find the new best sellers. And we'd have to do that from feel. And what worries me nowadays is that we're so obsessed with data, and we're so, you know, we're almost all following the same direction, that there's not enough brave people who go, I don't think that direction makes sense. And no more is that relevant than here we are talking about the future of our high streets. And what we're doing is we're saying, well, the data is saying that everything is going online. It's all about Amazon. So guess what? I'm a property fund. I'm not going to invest in retail. I don't believe physical retail should exist. Whereas I'm completely different. I'm like led by the emotional intelligence of the customer. Because you know what? When my mum or my sister go out shopping, they don't bring a spreadsheet with them. They bring their feelings with them. You know, they like a top, it's because their eyes like it. You know, their touch and feel like it. You know, and I always remember that. And so I think we're in danger of becoming too obsessed with the data to the detriment of the existing businesses and the traditional businesses that are out there. Because I'm a great believer in the need for communities to come together. I'm a great believer in physical retail. I don't believe you can show content any better than in terms of physical retail. You can't, you know, until I get a website that can allow me to touch the fabric and put it on there and then, it's never going to match a shop for me, you know. So I just think we've got to be really careful at this moment in time that we don't get too obsessed with the data, and that's what I see happening. And we remember the emotional intelligence of the customer.
No, I completely agree. And to kind of dig into that a bit further, Roger. So for listeners of this podcast who are challenger food and drink brands who are getting, as I said, pummeled up by data, they're trying to use data to make decisions in a world that is so data drenched. How can founders cultivate better emotional intelligence? Are there any ways you've done it?
Yeah, I think you do it through, in my case, you do it through sort of time, and you start to, and confidence, you start to realize over a period of time that when you start to trust your own feelings, that actually your own judgment can often be right. I mean, you know, with Steve Jobs that created the first Apple Mac, if he was copying IBM, no, he wouldn't. He was trying to create a new future, which is based upon the graphical interface, or something that he saw somewhere else and realized that he could use it in a different world. You know, when they first created the iPod, you know, he didn't go and look at a CD player. He went, well, I'm going to create something new. And certainly when Elon Musk was creating Tesla, I don't think he was looking at what General Motors were doing. So you've got to have belief. And I think when you really get that belief and that intuition that you've got, and you know that this is the right thing to do, you get real strength from it. And it does concern me nowadays that, you know, if you're in the food and drink industry and all you're doing is regurgitating what everyone else is doing, well, guess what? I don't think you're going to succeed, because in order for small companies to succeed, they've got to have product that really stands out, or they've got to have incredible marketing that gets them more traffic to that product than your traditional businesses. So you've got to do something new.
No, it's so interesting. I always learn as we record these conversations, but our best performing product was actually a mistake. We burnt it in a rugby club kitchen. We literally burnt the nuts. And our founder had I suppose what you're saying here, Roger, is emotional intelligence. He was like, screw it, let's blitz it up. We created deep roast peanut butter, which no one had, or you'll try it when you try the samples. It's super intense. And actually now all the big brands in peanut butter have now followed suit. So again, I suppose you're right. It's about connecting the dots of your life, which you've just said there, but also that intuition to I don't know. There's something, I don't know how, it's quite an ethereal thing, isn't it?
Trust your emotional intelligence. Trust your emotions.
Yeah.
If you like it, somebody else will like it. And you just don't have the confidence to do that.
And that's what where I wanted to kind of dig here, Roger, is that you seem now to have this huge confidence in your emotional ability, and obviously, you know, everything you've done, but there must have been a place when, you know, you've been fired from those 3 jobs, you're in New York, and you must have felt quite, I don't know, I would have personally lacked confidence and felt insecure. Like, how did you feel in that? Because I think listeners will really potentially empathize with the Roger when he was in New York and he'd been fired from 3 jobs. Like, how did you feel, and how did you begin to build that confidence to where you are now, which is supreme emotional intelligence, I would say?
Well, not supreme emotional intelligence, but I'm more confident in myself and more confident in my decisions. I mean, it wasn't an easy journey for me, because I mean, it sort of, it almost, for me, it sort of went back to deep rooted insecurity when, you know, my parents went to Malaysia. You know, I was originally born in London. I lived in London for my first 3 or 4 years in Lambeth and South London. My father came from a quite big landowning family in Malaysia. My mum was a very poor Irish, you know, woman that he met when he was studying at UCD, and we went back to Malaysia. And, you know, unfortunately the marriage didn't work out, and I sort of came back from Malaysia after maybe having a lovely life with servants and a big house to living in a council estate in South London. And I think definitely for the first sort of 10 years, say when I was 8, 9, going up to 18, if you really want to, I was really trying to fit in. Yeah, I was good at sports and I was academically good, although I don't believe I really reached my full potential. But I don't think I really excelled at university. I didn't do what I really wanted to do. But then, you know, I had this light bulb moment with myself, which is when I started Box Fresh. You know, I was suddenly, you know, with my partner, suddenly good at something. And it was weird. There was a stage at Box Fresh, which I always trust the designers to do the designs. And the designers we had were incredible designers, but they were maybe too forward thinking, too out there. They're almost too creative, which you can get sometimes. You need quite a nice balance between commercial and creative, and not just too creative. And actually, we took off as a business when I took over the sort of design function of Box Fresh and started to run the design team, as opposed to always abdicating that responsibility, because I didn't have the confidence to do it. And then you start to get the confidence in the decisions. And when you start seeing that actually your decisions and your feelings are right, it's just an incredible moment. You suddenly just have total belief. You know, I don't know if it's your ego going crazy, but you have this total belief in yourself and what you can do. And, you know, I did in my later years, I went from being very insecure, I'd say when I was younger, to having real belief in my feelings. And I've never really looked back in terms of having that self-belief when it comes to business. I don't think in all aspects, I don't think, you know, but definitely when it came to business, I really have that self-belief, and I really understand that it is trusting my emotional intelligence is an important part of me. And I understand my makeup from my mother's side and my dad's side, and I've got this weird combination. I'm half Irish, half Malaysian, Chinese. I've got this sort of Chinese side of me which is very analytical, but I've got this mad creative side of me which is the Irish. And when they're in tune, it's a good combination. When they're not in tune, it's not so good.
I bet. Swinging
yeah.
to Irish could be problematic.
I know. When I was younger, you know, went into Irish mode too often. So, I mean, they used to say, I think in Ireland, like shouting is like just another form of communication, whereas to anyone who's English, it was like, what's he shouting about? What is that shouting? It's like talking. You know? Okay.
No, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So no, that's really, really interesting. And I think what you said there about these I think all founders, entrepreneurs, and actually driven people, it's coming from a place of insecurity somewhere in the matrix. I mean, I suppose for me it was, you know, being predicted crap grades, all these things that just drive you to, but you got to use that as I suppose for listeners, you've got to use it as a furnace to keep propelling them forward.
How the first university career to you? I mean, you were chatting to me about your university career before. You were like ending up studying something you didn't really enjoy, and as a result of that, you spent a lot of the time partying or running parties. That's what I was doing. So, you know,
I wasn't running parties. I was just going to parties. But yeah. Well, no, but I think as well, it's like if for me, it was like this just isn't like this isn't turning me on in it at all. So it's like just would rather go out and get booze, to be honest. But I think through that, I learned that it's through that sort of struggle and insecurity, I definitely found what I wanted to do, which is ultimately is food, and now I suppose this as well, doing these podcasts. So when you said you finally found you were good at something, what was that something? What was the thing Roger Wade was better at?
I think, you know, for me, I've got a strong visual eye. So, you know, I had a love of streetwear and I had a love of clothing. That's why I was doing it. So, you know, it was trusting my sense of judgment when it came to clothing. I mean, to give you a couple of stories, I mean, to give you an example, we started streetwear right at the very beginning, when it was only us, maybe Tuppers of St. George and maybe Mau Mau, when the only guys around. Maybe to a little extent sort of Komodo, because it wasn't really streetwear, but it was definitely around the same sort of time. And, you know, we used to, I remember back in the day, selling in New York to a little small store called Union, which was about 100 square foot. And that guy went on to found Supreme. I think their recent valuation was 2 billion. But it was like, it was day one of doing it. And I guess what I realized then was trusting my own taste and my own judgment about something. And when you run a fashion brand, you're not just doing fashion, you're doing trade shows, you're selling international. So you really learn the skills of business. So, you know, I guess that there wasn't so much a one moment. I just became increasingly successful in it. And the more and more I trusted myself, the more and more successful I was. And the more and more we tried to do things new, actually, that proved successful. You know, I didn't, as I said before, didn't really look at anyone else. And then I think with BOXPARK, I think where things changed as I started to really mature as an entrepreneur. And I think that sort of sometimes uncontrolled passion, I started to tame. And it was when I really started to look at other ways of becoming a better entrepreneur. I think I became a better entrepreneur. So by that, I think I was a pretty poor leader. You know, I think you get great entrepreneurs, but they don't necessarily make great leaders. So I think Elon Musk and Steve Jobs are great examples of that, as they all are also great examples of starting business because of a low self-esteem. So Steve Jobs adopted, Elon Musk bullied at school. You know, they had something driving them that needed to prove they were the best. You know, even someone like Richard Branson, I think I've read in his autobiography that, you know, he was one of the poorest kids at Stowe. I'm not sure if that's a contradiction, but
yeah,
you know,
it certainly is. Yeah.
Stowe, and that's why he went into business. He wanted to prove himself. So, you know, I think what I realize is firstly going back to that sort of ego side, but also just trusting your instinct is absolutely key.
Absolutely. So kind of just what you've discussed there, which I think for our listeners my listeners, sorry, is really pertinent, is this: just don't look at what anyone else is doing. But you know what you said earlier about Steve Jobs didn't look at the Walkman to create the iPod. I think in our sort of FMCG challenger brand spheres, there's this kind of always almost paranoia of looking at the competition. And what I've learned, well, I'm learning from you, is like, actually, no, if you'd looked at the competition, there wouldn't be BOXPARK, right? Yeah. So I think, yeah, exactly. So I think there's anyone listening to this, potentially get away from constantly, you know, checking your bloody competitor's Instagram like every 24 hours a day. It's just pointless and futile. So that's absolutely brilliant, and I really appreciate
something new or better, because I'm not sure you're going to compete in terms of, or you've got some great marketing. Like, you know, if you are a food influencer, of course you've got an advantage compared to everyone because you've got traffic. So then you can you know, you can go and do a vegan burger. That's just like a normal vegan burger, and it probably trade better than other places because you've got the traffic. So you've either got to have the traffic or you've got to have the content, because you don't have the conversion business side of it, because that's what other businesses do. So you've got to be obsessed about your content, and you've got to be obsessed about your traffic.
So when you say obsessed about your content and traffic, your online content, and then the traffic's the footfall coming to your store, or what's the difference? Sorry.
Okay, I'm really glad you asked that. Okay, because so, you know, I've been a retailer for 30 plus years, but I actually only think there's 3 things you need to be good at to be a good retailer. It doesn't matter whether it's online or in physical retail. I hate the fact I have to use the word physical retail to distinguish between the two. But anyway, let's say that, okay?
Yeah.
And there's only 3 things that matter. And firstly is content, right? If you haven't got great content, you won't exist. So by that, an example of BOXPARK, our content is our food and drink and our events and our play, yeah? And our environment. That's our content that we present to the customer, okay? In the case of peanut butter, it's the taste of that peanut butter or the packaging of that peanut butter. Okay.
Right.
But you can have the best content in the world, but if no one sees that content, you're not going to exist. So traffic is really important. So if you've got a store, you know, yeah, sometimes it works to put a store in a back alley that no one sees and you have this discovery thing. But 99 out of 100 times, you need to have a store in a good footfall location, or you need to create footfall to your online store. Okay, so you've got to create traffic. So if I'm a food influencer, I've already got loads. I know guys that run that big, you know, I don't know, YouTube influencers, and they make product or they make books or whatever. Yeah, of course they're going to do well because they got the traffic. So all they're doing is putting that traffic to their product that they've got, you know. And then finally you got conversion, which is you've got this good content, you've created traffic to it, and then you've got to turn that into sales. That's the fundamentals of retail. And what I like to talk about, and it's nothing more. So don't get too obsessed with the business side of things, because if you haven't got the content, you haven't got the traffic, you won't exist. So in our company, in when I used to run Box Fresh, and certainly now in BOXPARK, we put content people and marketeers really high up because they're fundamental to our business. And it's weird because back in the day, actually, there's a revolution in the British High Street, because people like River Island were some of the first people that actually created roles like creative director, you know, of before the companies were run by business people, told the creatives what product they wanted, which is absolutely crazy. They sort of changed the model and suddenly said, no, the creators should tell the business people what product we want. So in those companies out there, really elevate your guys that do creativity and do marketing, because there's loads of people that can do the business, right? But without great content, without great marketing, you won't exist as a business in terms of retail, and it's fundamental.
No, completely. And I think it's exactly the same with challenger food and drink brands. So on that, what would you say is the hardest, or with what would you say is the hardest out of content, traffic, and conversion that most businesses get wrong? Like, what's the hardest?
It's not as simple as that. You just can't be bad at any one of those. You've got to be great at all of them, or you've got to be at least good at them. You can't be weak at any of them. Like, if you've got the greatest product, let's say that product is peanut butter. It's a great tasting peanut butter in your case, and it's a really good price point. Okay. Well, if it's not on shelves that everyone can see, then it's pointless. You know, if it's only in a few little sort of independent food stores, you're never going to have any traction. You've got to make sure you get traction there. People got to know that brand. Okay. And then even if you've got it in a good supermarket, so you've got it into Waitrose, how do people know that brand in Waitrose? How do they know what that brand stands for? So you've got to market that brand. You've got to make sure that people understand that. So that content and that traffic and that positioning is everything. And then finally, it's about the business of selling it, you know. You've got to have the basics there, because you just won't exist.
That's absolutely brilliant. I've kind of, the three of them are inextricably intertwined. I think what you were saying about connecting the dots of your life and probably like a macro, but on a life level, in terms of this business philosophy of content, traffic, conversion, connecting those dots is really, really interesting. I think for us, at the beginning, we had a great product, horrendous traffic, horrendous conversion. And only now, after, you know, again, I suppose, well, just working is those things, we're still way off where we need to be, but they're coming into play quite nicely. No, that's brilliant, Roger.
Like we can take an example. Let's take examples. An example I've never really talked about. Let's take an example of it. Okay, a couple of darling examples. Let's take Gymshark. Okay, I think one of the clever things about Gymshark, it's direct to internet, isn't it? It's an incredible. I don't know, but effectively you buy it direct, right? And so they were creating great organic traffic themselves, okay? But their product was also strong and the price points was strong. So they had a unique business model. And because they were fully focused on online traffic, as ASOS was fully focused on being pure play, they generated more and more traffic. It wasn't so much that their product was better than Nike or Lululemon in the case of Gymshark, or, you know, ASOS's product was better than Topman's or Topshop's. It wasn't. It was that they were very good at traffic. And then conversely, you've got other guys that have just got fantastic product. And as a result of that fantastic product, they get a lot of traffic that they create from it, you know? So let's say Selfridges, you know, they've got a fantastic name. If a product goes into Selfridges, you almost think it's going to be a great product, you know, and that creates its own traffic. But you've got to think about those fundamentals when it comes to retail. And it's sort of digressing. That brings us on to the topic of people talk about the internet as being the only way of retailing. That's why I don't believe in that. Yes, the internet is a game changer, but is it the only channel? No, because I believe that physical retail, and people certainly like Steve Jobs did, and certainly Elon Musk did when they invested in stores. Elon Musk was selling cars in Westfields, you know. Apple was doing their churches, which were their Apple superstores. But they realized that you could show that content better in a store than you could ever do online. You could go in and try this Apple Watch and play with it and experiment it. And you can't really do that online, you know. So they realized that the content, there's no more enriching place to show content than physical retail. You know, I often equate to buying online. It's like watching fireworks on TV. It's not like the real deal. You know, so what I argue is the content that you can show in a 360-degree experience like a store is unmatched. If you go into a Brompton store and experiment with that bike for the first time and get it out in that store, you're never going to get that online. You're never going to get it online.
That's fascinating.
The content is, you can never show content better than the physical store. And then also you can create really cost-efficient traffic in a physical store, because it costs a lot of money to get traffic online with Google AdWords. But sometimes you can use physical retail to create your traffic by having influencers there, by having a pop-up store, you know, and actually that's creating traffic, that's creating noise. Well, that's cost-efficient traffic. And then finally, you've got conversion. In physical retail will convert normally at about 1 in 10 customers. Online, you convert at 1 in 100 customers, and probably 50% of that are returning your product. So again, this is sort of now joining up the stories that we're talking about, which is, we talked about trusting your emotional intelligence. You've got fund managers out there going, it's all online, we're selling our physical retail X, Y, and Z. But I've just said to you, I'm trying to balance that up with my own emotional intelligence and other people's emotional intelligence, and go, but I like shopping in stores, and other people like shopping in stores. And if my mum was alive, when she was buying a vegetable, she didn't really want them delivered because she wanted to see those vegetables. So it goes back. You've got to trust your emotional intelligence to go, I'm not quite buying into that direction. I'm going to go over in this direction. And that's where I am at the moment.
No, it's so interesting. And I was having this conversation the other day. Say again, sorry?
Don't follow the herd.
Oh God, completely. But back to what we were saying earlier, or linking up the dots, or connecting the dots, is we're having this conversation, I suppose, versus data versus emotion. And we're like, should we spend money doing an in-store sampling session where we're literally with the customer, telling them the story, getting them passionate, getting them to try it, tell, you know, everything, or give out, you know, 150 mini pots in one of those, like, imagine like a little jam thing you'd get. And obviously data would say, do that decision because it pays back on the P&L, right? Or it's easy to say, oh, we made X, boom, 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 boom. But I was like, and I think we, as a business, we came to the conclusions that actually the first interaction with the brand and the human connection is so much more important. And it is so much, if we have a good connection, they try the product face to face, they're going to tell their friends, which will then, I suppose, if we're looking at the content traffic conversion thing, if that content's great, they'll tell more of their friends, which will drive traffic. So that's brilliant. I love that, Roger. Thank you.
Also, regarding products, because you've got to sit down. You know, if you got to sit down, if you've got a small company, you've got to do your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you've got to go, you know, one of your major weaknesses is going to be your size and your ability to bring it to market. But that could be your strength, your ability to make decisions quickly, right? So then you've got to design your product, and you've got to go, look, if we do a bog standard product, we're not going to compete everyone else. Let us try and do a product that, you know, it's not available, or is it a variation of that, for instance? You know, it's and you've got to understand what your customer wants. You know, okay, and it doesn't mean that you have to reinvent the tree. Let's take the example of Fever Tree versus Schweppes. You know, Schweppes were the dominant, you know, tonic in the market. Every time you got gin and tonic, it was almost going to be Schweppes. And Fever Tree just came along and just said, but we can make a better one. Our content is going to be better. But you've got to be brave enough to do that. The rest is history.
No, love it. And I think for listeners, it's not getting bogged down into what the big guys are doing. What, you know, don't look for anyone else, but also focusing on your strength, which is our ability to move fast. Like most people listening to this is if they've got an idea for a new product, they can move quick. There's no corporate red tape. They can release that quick and move. So I think that's brilliant, Roger. Yeah.
Or it might be, remember, your strength might be creating traffic. And in that case, you don't need to create the best product. You just need to create a good product. So an example of that is Jake Paul, right? Classic example, right? He's got a lot of traffic. He's a YouTube star. He's a pretty average boxer, if that. Okay.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
A lot more money than everyone else. Why? Because he can create the traffic. It's not because of his content, the boxing. Start to put those things in those boxes and you understand. But he doesn't go to promote because he can't do the conversion. So the promoter puts it on. Do you see my point? But
it's brilliant. Yeah. It's absolutely brilliant. And I think there's so many parallels.
And understand, it's simple. And sorry, I'm just going to go back because I'm just going to actually just go full circle on some of the things I was saying about when I talked earlier, and I was talking about, and I did a poll recently on LinkedIn, and I don't think people realize the purpose I was doing that poll. I was being quite ambiguous. And the poll was, why are you in business? You know, what is your why? I think, you know, based on that book, you know, so, and is the reason you're in business because it makes you feel better? It's about your ego, but people don't like that word. But, you know, or are you in business to set up a business to give it to your children, which there's a lot of people that are, you know, that traditionally a lot of people would do that. Or are you in business to make money? And I was amazed on this poll that I ran, because I think I think less than 20% of people said they were in business to make money. I think it was the least favorite choice, you know, and I just found that unbelievable, because if you get answers back like, oh, I want to save the world, you know, or I want to create a better world, you know, that's your ego. That's you just making yourself feel better. That's why you're in business. In the same way, when I first set up my business, it was something I was suddenly good at. I was able to go, I'm Mr. Box Fresh or whatever I am, you know, it made me feel better. But what I realized over time was that it's okay to say you should set up a business to sell a business. That's what I believe. Because don't be ashamed of making money, because it's how you make your money and how you spend your money, that will define you. But for entrepreneurs to go out there and only 1 in 5 of them to say they're in business to make money, I find it unbelievable. Like I think that people like Warren Buffett and Gates, you know, Bill Gates, they've given 95% of their money away to charities. You know, I think we've got the Gates Foundation trying to get rid of malaria and loads of other things. Okay, well, they're doing more for giving back, but they weren't unashamed about making money in the first place. And I think you have to ask your why when you go into business. What is your reason to go into business? Because I will tell you, if not, you're going to have happen what happened to me. 15 years are going to go by, you know, and then you're going to realize your why is to create security for your family, you know, and you want to set up the business. But if I knew that 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier, I would have started a bit earlier to do that journey. But understand your why and why you're in business. You know, really deep down, understand your why. You know, and don't say the why that sounds really great. It's cheesy. We all heard that crap before. We don't believe it. Be honest with yourself. You know, there's, you know,
it's almost like virtue signaling your why, which is really putrid, because it's like, well, externally at least, it's like our why. And if it's not authentic, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I think that's, again, for listeners, it's like when you create a why, like if you're looking or reading what everyone else's why is, again, go back to like, you know, don't look at what anyone else is doing. You're just going to carbon copy some crap, which isn't authentic. So I think, I don't know, I do a lot of meditation. I think from doing that, you can really dig deep into what, like you pull back all the layers of everything. And that's where you find your kind of what your actual why is. And I think, again,
that's your why at the moment, you know.
Well, it feels like that. Yeah.
You started, yes, in food and drink, and I'm sure that's going well, but you've obviously got a passion for this podcast. So you've got to now figure out how to monetize that passion for the podcast and how you make your product better and better and better. But clearly you're enjoying it because you're doing it for free at the moment, and you're learning a lot from it. But you'll look back and you go, and then suddenly I started this podcast, and the next minute it really blew up and became a business. That's a really familiar story. People follow their passions, and because they're so passionate about it, it grows.
Oh, completely. So again, there's so much to explore with this. But one thing you said earlier, which I thought was really, really interesting, was you said you had uncontrolled passion as an entrepreneur, but you were a pretty poor leader. What I want to kind of explore now is almost connecting the dots of Box Fresh to BOXPARK and some of the fundamental leadership lessons you've learned as you've transitioned. So when you say uncontrolled passion, what do you mean by that?
Well,
and why was that detrimental, I suppose, or not? Yeah,
it's massively detrimental. My first business, I think, and that's, you know, why I'm sort of referring to the subject. I think because I set up Box Fresh, I think largely to really fill the insecurities of being unemployed or wanting to get back, wanting to be successful, coming from South London, from, you know, moving from a wealthy background, I guess Malaysia, to a council estate in South London. That, you know, it really drove me towards sort of success, but I was doing it more out of ego. And what I didn't realize at the time, or I didn't have the ability to control, was you need to bring along a team. And, you know, and it's I think a lot of entrepreneurs need to make a lot of soul searching inside of them. And just because you're a good entrepreneur, it doesn't make you a great leader. And I definitely was that case. You know, my first business, I think I was a really poor leader, but a very good entrepreneur. And in my second business, I think BOXPARK, second major business, BOXPARK, I was a good entrepreneur, but I was also a better leader. And that's because I recognized that I needed to bring people on board with me in this journey for it to grow. And I've been lucky enough recently, you know, I've supported my team in terms of creating share options for them, and we're in the we've just raised major private equity from LDC, and I won't always be there as the CEO of the company. I will probably move over to becoming the executive chairman of the company, or an NED in the company, you know, and I'll hand over the reins of the company. And I'm getting as much pleasure from that as I did before, sort of being in charge, because I'm really enjoying helping people and work, you know, seeing them grow. And I've only recently, in the past 3-4 years, I've taken leadership training, taken personal coaching, you know, really tried to become a better leader. And I've seen enormous results from that, not only in being able to create a great management team around me, but also just to let go and just, you know, I've after 30 years of being in business, or 25 certainly, I suddenly realized the art of being a leader is you make the decisions, or you might make the final decision based upon a recommendation, but actually you need to give the control to everyone else, and you need to sit back, because if you get too deeply involved with everything, you don't have an overview, and you're not leading, you're just interfering, you know. And you have to lose your ego. You have to let go of your ego and say to yourself, look, you know, I need to teach these people to do their jobs better. I need to teach these people to catch their own fish rather than I fish for them, you know. And as a result of that, our business has got better, and, you know, people enjoying their work at BOXPARK. I work a lot less than I ever did, you know, and I have time for things like podcasts. And I also want to give back to the industry, you know. And you know, I'm coming near to the end of my entrepreneurial career, because I want it to be that way. I don't want my whole life to be defined by the businesses I set up. I want to be, say, right, I've done the business thing. I want to now become the best individual I can be. And, you know, if that is going off on a yoga and a meditation retreat in Sri Lanka to become a better person, then I'll try that, you know. But my focus is not going to be all about business. And let me tell you, for certainly the majority of my business life, I've been totally obsessed with my businesses to the detriment of other parts of my life. And I've made some sacrifices which I don't think I would make now, because you have to have that obsession. But then you've got to ask yourself, why do you have that obsession? Why are you doing that? What is driving you? You know, I just don't feel a need to prove anymore. I don't need to be in charge. You know, I'm just happy to let other people do, and I get more from that. You know, but I do, you know, I won't, without naming names, I do see entrepreneurs out there on LinkedIn and everything, and they're, you know, look at me and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I'm like, so, you know, you don't need to, just sit back. Haven't you got enough?
Do you think that's because you've now, through time and experience, you've become to peace with some of those early insecurities, and that's how I've
taken, I've taken the time to work on it, you know, to understand. And you do, you know, I have, you know, I'm lucky. I've got a really good family. I've got, you know, an amazing wife, you know, far too good for me. Great, you know, great children who keep me on my toes, and I've got a great team around me. I'm really probably enjoying my entrepreneurial career at you know, more than I've ever have, and I'm at the same time probably spending less time working. But you know, and yeah, I do understand some of the ways I was before and what I was like, and what I'm now like. I'm not saying I've completely resolved it, but I've definitely become a better leader. you know, not a perfect leader, but a better one. And I
Yeah.
strive.
And so just for listeners who are leaders or who are in the process of building teams, so
Yeah.
other than, you know, letting go and what you said there of leading versus interfering, I thought was terrific. Is there anything else that makes a really good leader that you could pass on to listeners?
I think you've got to, you know, going back to that early questions of asking your why and what you really want to do within your own organization. I think if you leave your ego at the doorstep of your business and actually make decisions based upon your why, I think sometimes the businesses would benefit better. So in my case, I definitely in the past was probably better as a sort of product man and marketing man, but let someone else run the business. In my current business, I'm lucky enough to have a great CFO that works alongside me, who's really good at the business side of things, a really good head of operations that's really good at delivering the operation, something I find, you know, just haven't got the patience for, you know, and we make a great team, you know, and I recognize that. So I think what I would say to those entrepreneurs is recognize within you, you know, it's okay for you to say, I'm a great ideas person, I'm a great entrepreneur, but I'm not a good leader of businesses. And it's weird. I see a lot of people now that I go, you know, and some of them are mates, I go, you're great ideas, man, but you shouldn't be running a company. You haven't got the skill set to run your company. And that's not a detriment, because there's also things you've got that no one else would have, you know. Just asking those questions.
Absolutely. So how long have you got, by the way, Roger?
I've got like wrap up in about 10-15 minutes, say.
Yeah, perfect. Just because I've realized that we've gone on probably more, but I'm really enjoying this. So where I wanted to kind of go now, as we have discussed this, is BOXPARK, but also what I picked up from your Holly Tucker podcast was a quote. Yeah, that was honestly one of the best. She's absolutely brilliant. So what I want to explore now is BOXPARK and this piece of advice you were given by Ted DeCruz. I think hopefully I've said that right. Is you've always got to be special to your customer. If you're not, you won't exist. And I think that is absolutely brilliant. In terms of BOXPARK, how do you actually implement that for the customer at BOXPARK? Because it seems like it's such a big moving thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, you know, for those viewers that are out there that don't know who Ted DeCruz is, or even who Holly is. I mean, Ted DeCruz was a brand consultant that I met when I was a very young entrepreneur, about the age of 25, maybe my late 20s. And at the time, he was one of the biggest brand consultants in the world. I think he was working for Wolf Hollands as their brand director at the time. He's gone on some massive jobs, you know, like huge jobs. You know, he would get asked to reimagine the future of like banks or hospitals or something like that. It's something crazy again. And I remember meeting him, and he is a bit of he would mind me saying, a bit of a mad genius. You know, everything is intense when you meet Ted, you know, and his sort of intensity level was off the Richter scale. And he just sat me down, and he said, Roger, if you're not, he said, in the future, you know, this is going back 30 years, if you're not special to your customer, you won't exist. And it just stuck with me. That was the mantra that I used throughout my whole career then. Just be special to customer, be completely obsessed by the customer. So in the example of BOXPARK, it comes back to the product, traffic, conversion. I'm always looking at the tip of the iceberg. I've always, all my careers, I've been a product marketer, a brand man. That's where I've been, because that's the bit that's the customer can see. So I'm obsessed, you know, with the customer experience, the making it special, okay? And in our example, and I'll talk to you about the examples of my obsession with that, is I would go and see every site that we own minimum once a week, say. I'd go and walk it individually. Sometimes I make surprise visits, but certainly once a week I'd go to a site. And if I go to a site, I would look at every bit of detail. I would walk the floor with the manager, and I would notice anything. I would notice from an air conditioning unit being in the wrong place. I would notice if the lights are not right. I would notice if the sound level was not right. I would notice if the staff are just on their phones. I would notice if the Christmas decorations, which I just went to view yesterday, were not correct. So I'm obsessed with the customer experience, and in hospitality, it really is about lighting and sound and heating, or cool, or the ambient, shall we say, is critical. And the next bit that's really important is the food. So what's the quality of the food like? What's the quality of the drinks like? What's the quality of the events like? And I would have sign off on all of those, you know, and it is difficult now because I can't be everywhere, but I can sort of sign it off and have a quick look and Google or whatever. So the bit I would be really focused at BOXPARK on food, drink, the events that we have on, the environment that we have, the marketing that we produce, anything that the customer sees, I would be all over, you know. It wouldn't be unusual for a Christmas banner that was going to go up to come across my table for approval, and I'd go, yeah, that's fine, you know. Or if somebody's worded today, they worded a digital banner weirdly, and I went, what's the deal with the wording? They're so descriptive. Descriptive is meant to be an advert. So that sort of detail, you know, to going in the toilets and having a look and checking the toilets is good, you know, is a right environment. I had to be careful about my words there. I was going to say.
Yeah. No, it's
so it's that obsession with being special to your customer and looking at everything. And I would have carried that all through my working career to when at Box Fresh, designing every single, you know, signing off every single design of the product, viewing every sample that was produced, you know, making sure it was in the good outlets from our sales team, making sure the marketing was right and attracting the right traffic. You know, it's just anything the customer sees, that's where you'll find me, you know. And if it's talking about a balance sheet, if it's talking about HR issues, you won't see me close to it. I'll leave it to other people to do.
Yeah, and I suppose that almost comes back from your, well, through emotional intelligence and reducing kind of your ego plus time, you're learning to figure out to play where, well, I interviewed someone, I interviewed Luke Bose, who's founder of Lucky Saint, an alcohol-free beer brand, the other day, and he's a previous guest, and he said one of his biggest lessons was only do the thing only you can do. And I think what you've said there about the tip of the iceberg is brilliant, whereas you don't get distracted with HR or and I think there's so much in that for founders. There's one of this, or listeners of this podcast, there's one obsessed with the customer. And this is an advantage where the big brands can't do it as much because they can't be as close to the customer in many ways.
And two,
way too many layers. Yeah.
Too many organizational layers. Like in our company, literally a decision would come across me every week. We meet as a management team, and it wouldn't be rare for us to make a decision in 1 minute, go, yeah, we're doing that, let's stick to that. That's it. It wouldn't be a big discussion. It'd be like, I would trust my feelings and go, let's do that. And then going back to what the guy said from Lucky Saints, I have something similar, which is, you know, in business, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just got to make sure our wheel is turning a bit better than our competitors. So we focus, we just want to be a bit better than everyone else at what we do. That's all we try to do. You know, it's brilliant. Forward. We're never just resting our laurels. It's constantly, what can we do to make it better? What can we do?
No, I love connecting the dots of with previous guests as well, because Charlie Bigham came on and he said his whole thing is 1% better every week, every month, every year, plus time equals a pretty bloody good business. And I think you kind of have facets of that within BOXPARK and Box Fresh. Rogers, I'm conscious of your time here, so there's an area that I've got to explore out of pure curiosity here, because I'm an avid foodie. But so what? I mean, walking through and eating and drinking at BOXPARK, it's like such an eclectic mix of these amazing indie retailers, and you just feel, because it's indie, it's small, and the food's amazing, it does feel special, right? But I suppose, what does food mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'll be frank with you. I've not come at this from a foodie's, you know, angle. You know, one of my best friends is Bill from Bill's, you know, and he's a foodie. He's like obsessed with food, you know, and he'll talk about food. I've not come from that background. I've come from a branding sort of more background. Okay, so when we originally set up BOXPARK, it was really meant to be a retail development for street wear and sports fashion, but it was the street food that took off. So, you know, the reality is there's such similarity between street fashion and street food. And why? It's just another trend. It is. Streetwear was always about breaking down the layers of the fashion industry and just saying, actually, fashion was accessible to anyone, and you didn't need to be a fashion designer to create great fashion. You just need to look around you, and it was sometimes the products were there. So, for instance, we brought brands like Carhartt to the UK. We brought brands like Penfield to the UK, and definitely Carhartt was an American workwear brand, and Penfield was an American mountaineering sort of brand, or an outdoor brand. Okay, so we weren't fashion trained. Yeah, my two designers went and did a textile degree, but I certainly wasn't. So with street food, I saw the same similarities. With street food, you've got often young independents that just want to create a new type of food that they love, but they don't have the classical training or the infrastructure, and they just want to be focused on the food. So I think Black Bear Burger is a great example of that. You know, they just want to focus on the food. So we let those guys just focus on the food, and we do everything else for them. We provide the traffic for them. You know, they focus on their content of food. We do the digital marketing. We do the cleaning. We do the toilets. We do all the council things for them. They've only got to focus on food. You know, we even get the delivery contracts for most of the guys, or provide the POS. So it's, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to you that, you know, as I said to you before, my daughter's a massive foodie. She'll tell you about, you know, if I go to a restaurant, she'll order for me, because she'll go, Dad, no, you want to have this. This is what you have. This is famous for this, X, Y, Z, and this chef worked here, and it used to be from there. It's you know, that's not me. I'm just more about the food. But one of the things that is common with Box Fresh is I wanted to break down the layers of elitism when it came to food. And it's the same with Box Fresh. I remember feeling intimidated back in the day of going into Jones and Floral Street, and, you know, as a spotty sort of South London kid, and not feeling as though I fitted in because I didn't have my Japanese Fujiwara suit on, right? And I had that same feelings when I'm going to, you know, a really nice restaurant, you know, Trois Garçons or whatever, you know. And that feeling of elitism, and I want to break that down. I think that good food should be affordable to everyone and available to everyone. So I'm really inspired by like that street food show on Netflix, where you've got, you know, the 8-year-old Thai lady who can make the best noodles or whatever, you know. Or Hawker Chan from Singapore, you know. I'm inspired by people who provide great food at a great price and it's accessible. And that's the common theme between those businesses for me. I love the idea of just providing food and an accessible, and it's accessible to everyone, and not just food, drink, and entertainment. You know, it's, you know, I love the fact that we go to areas like Croydon and Wembley. It's you know, it's not hard to do well in Shoreditch. It's there's traffic, but it's really hard to do well in Croydon when people weren't believing in Croydon. It's really hard to do well in Wembley Park when people weren't going to Wembley Park. But, you know, providing them great street food and watching them come out to BOXPARK, that's been fantastic.
I love, well, again, sort of connecting the dots with this, but I love it how you answered there saying you're not like an avid foodie, and what we were discussing previous, like just authentically knowing your why. And you just completely said that. And I absolutely love that. And then also what we said, discussing earlier about, you know, the insecurities, and you said, you know, you're a spotty kid, you know, trying to get access to the clothes and to these restaurants. And I love it how it's all sort of piecing together. It's like you've just unapologetically said, like, this is my why, and I absolutely love it. But it's kind of ties in with some of those early insecurities as well. And I just think there's so much. I think the key from this conversation for me is just knowing your why, but ignoring all the kind of, I don't know, just the virtue signaling whys that are going out there at the minute. All right, so just a couple of things.
Say that, because as you're talking about that, you know, it does make me realize that your insecurities drive you on, and they've driven on some of the biggest entrepreneurs that have ever existed, as I said before. So don't run away from those insecurities. That's part of your DNA. That's going to give you the passion to go forward, because that's what you really need as an entrepreneur. You need to, when you get knocked down, to get back up. If I was to say one trait I had, it's that. It's just persistence. I would just get back up, get back up, get back up. And I would knock at that door, knock at that door, knock at that door until that door opened.
What was let's check time. Okay, a few more minutes. So what with that, what was the hardest like door you had to knock down in your career, where you had to be the most persistent? Because I think everyone listening to this will have to knock down doors like there's no end. So they could take some.
I think you know, in the fashion business, I think there's a lot of egos and there's a lot of snobbery. So, you know, a lot of viewers out there won't realize that what would happen actually is that if you stocked your product in one store, for instance, okay, and you know, other brands, or if you wanted to buy that product and they already had a stockist in that area, they wouldn't sell to you. There would be a lot of elitism, or you would get a call from a stockist going, I don't want you selling there, you know. And if you sell to more than one place, we're going to drop you. And, you know, there were some real bullies in the industry when it came to that, you know, this sort of, and we're talking about challenges here. And the same is in the way I see that in the food world. There is food snobbery out there of like, oh, you know, our food's this, and we've won this award and X, Y, Z. I don't give a damn. I really don't. I only care about the quality of your food, you know. And if I've got a kid that's making the greatest product and no one knows him, I still go with him, you know. And when I talk about breaking down the barriers, it's those barriers of the institutional snobbery that exists, and which exists in the food business. It exists in the food and drink business. It exists in the fashion business. You know, I remember when we first set up BOXPARK, okay, I remember a very well-known retail group that had a store round the corner from us, ringing up all the brands saying that if you stock them, your product in BOXPARK, we're going to stop selling you, right?
Right.
And I was just disgusted by that. We were like a young, small business. They were a huge American business that had loads of stores in America and were over here in the UK. And I was like, why do you need to do that? You know, it's disgusting behavior. They literally rang up and it's all our stock and said, you can't stop them. Why? What were you worried about? We weren't going to make a dent in them, you know. And in the same way, you have the same sort of snobbery exists within food. You know, you have, oh, you know, they haven't got this brand, haven't got that brand, or, you know, the customer doesn't care. What the customer cares about ultimately is the product. And if the product is really good, it's not so much the name above the door that really matters, or the Michelin stars that you've got. I'm more, as I said, I'm more turned on by watching that street food show on Netflix than I am by watching MasterChef, or by watching some Michelin star chef. You know, it's
the best
product. So those are the difficult barriers that you have to break down sometimes.
No, for sure. And I mean, I went to a place in where was it? I think, yeah, Euston on Sunday, Roti King, like the best Malaysian food. And it's so small, it's underground, there's queues outside. And I'm like, that's what it's about. That's what they had actually ironically run out of roti. The kitchen, the machine had broken. But it was actually really, really good what we did have. Amazing. So Roger, I just want to finish on some quick fire questions that I ask most guests. So the first is, I asked this to all guests who've got kids because it invokes quite an interesting lens to look through. So what is some of the advice you give to your kids as they're about to embark out on, probably embarking out onto the world?
Really sadly, it's advice I give that they don't listen to. And so my son is 17 and he's a budding artist and he's very strong-minded creatively. And my daughter's 22 and she's studying business at Trinity, a master's at Trinity, and she's, from a business perspective, very smart. And the lesson that I tried to give them both was the lesson that I didn't learn when I was younger, and I wish I taught it to my younger self, which is the ability to listen. Just stop and listen to people and take the time to listen and stop thinking you know best always. And I see this, you know, it's something I still need to get better at. And it's such a skill, listening. And you can learn so much from other people through listening. And hopefully your viewers today have not been too bored and they'll listen to this, because I think I'm just trying to impart on them some of the things I've learned, you know, honestly to them over a 30+ year entrepreneurial career.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I think it's such a superpower, especially with this, again, going back to this insecurity and ego. When you've got insecurity plus ego, the last thing you want to do is listen. But if you can relinquish that, you listen, you let go, I suppose, as you lead as well. It's brilliant.
Very astute you said that, because it's
very what? Sorry,
it's astute what you just said, because
I
think you talk a lot when you're nervous, you know, and it takes strength to sometimes just sit back and only say a few things, but they're wise things, you know. And it's understandable. It's not something that comes naturally. I don't think it's definitely not come naturally to me, and I hope it comes more naturally to my children. But at the rate we're going, no,
yeah,
they're strong-minded.
Amazing. And so the other question is, so what is that one question early stage founders should be asking themselves that if they did would pour gasoline on their growth? So sorry, that they're not asking themselves enough, that if they did would pour gasoline on their growth?
Well, I think just it goes back full circle to what I said at the very beginning, which is really understand your why. You know, as I said, I only think there's 3 whys to be in business. 1's to make money, 2 is to hand over to your family, and 3 it is to for your ego. And be, and you know, within that ego thing is that whole thing of making a better world, X, Y, Z, and you hear it all, because that's all about self-gratification in the end, no matter which way you say it. Sorry, I'm being really frank.
No.
You know, or you're saving the planet. You know, it's again self-gratification, letting everyone know you're saving the planet. Just know your why. Be really, really careful if your why is your ego, because I'm not sure that running a business is the best place to improve your ego. It really, you know, I would suggest there might be cheaper ways of dealing with your ego than running a business. So I would say that would be a really, really key lesson to any budding entrepreneur out there. And then, you know, and also just the point I made about leadership, which is just because you're a good entrepreneur, don't be ashamed to say you're not a great leader and a natural leader. And then try to surround yourself with people that fill in your weaknesses. That's okay. Just admit that you're not great at that. You know, it takes strength to admit that you're not great at that, you know. So just remember that not all entrepreneurs are great leaders. They're really not. Look at Steve Jobs. I think he was pretty poor. I think Elon Musk is a pretty poor leader. I don't know. I think he only wants to control from the fact he's a leader. Certainly as a leader of people, I don't think he's very good. You know, he seems to get in a lot of trouble, you know. But as an entrepreneur, I think he's absolutely off the Richter scale, you know. So he's got to find somebody that will balance him well, you know, and go from there. I don't know why he feels the need to be out there so much. If I was him, I'd be sitting back a lot more, you know, and just get on with what I'm doing. Stop being a figurehead.
No, for sure. So final question. I think it sort of, it ties in or connects the dots to this whole conversation, but I wrote it down earlier. It's like, what is your why kind of now? And as you move, you know, you said I was Mr. Box Fresh, and then you said, now I suppose you're Mr. BOXPARK, but there's going to come a point when you're not tied to that. And I'd love to know what that Roger's why is then.
So, you know, my why when I was in business was to run a business to create financial stability for myself, my family, and my friends, I guess, you know. So I've been lucky enough to reach that milestone of, you know, I've got that financial stability. And I think sort of going forward, I want to focus on becoming a better person, you know. I'm not saying I'm a bad person, but everyone can be a better person. So I want to focus on things that are not defined by work, where before it was almost everything worked around my work. I now want everything to work around personal objectives as opposed to business objectives. So, you know, become a better dad, a better husband, a better person. You know, you only live once. Get to see some great things in the last sort of third of my life, I guess, you know, and experience great things and live life in a happy and peaceful way.
No, that's amazing. No, I've absolutely loved that, Roger. There's just so much in it. I think this whole idea of relinquishing your ego and insecurities to find your authentic why is one part. But then I also think using your insecurities as like a furnace to drive you forward. It's a bit of a contradiction, but I think that's some of the key things I've learned from this. I've absolutely loved talking to you, and I really appreciate you giving us the time.
You're welcome, Dan. It's an absolute pleasure. And I wish you all the best in what you're doing. And I hope I haven't bored the viewers too much.
No, it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.